Hi everyone, it's Ajari Topa here. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on SD-WAN or SDY, a solution that has revolutionized the networking industry, designed to address the core operational challenges of traditional WAN, such as inefficient management, service outages, and the inability to scale. So this webinar is going to give you an insight into the why behind SD-WAN and some of the key technologies leading this solution and where it could or could not potentially work for you. So John, if you don't mind just hopping to the next slide for me. As per usual, if you have any questions, please use the question and chat function, which is highlighted in the box, and we'll be sure to cover these questions in the Q&A. Of course, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask yourselves, then feel free to do so and just raise your hand and press the raise your hand button, and we'll add that in. So just a bit around the two hosts today. So you've got two of our finest Bechtle consultants, John Moore and Scott Coombe. Scott, from a very young age, went into the world of networking and hasn't left, working with various different customers along the way and reaching the highest grade certifications with some of our key vendors such as Cisco and HP Aruba. John, who will lead the discussion today, has years of experience on your side of the fence, managing an infrastructure for a billion-pound organization. So he truly gets your day-to-day pains as he's experienced them himself. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John to kick things off. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Ajay. Hi guys, thanks for joining us this morning, and I'll be taking you through SD-WAN. In terms of where we are, we want to go into really talking about, what SD-WAN is, why SD-WAN, a bit around the approach that people generally take in terms of rolling that out in the deployment, really what's going on in terms of the market at the moment, and then really a little bit. It's a little bit around, is SD-WAN ready for you, or are you ready for it right now? The whole point of this morning really is not to talk about product. We want to be talking about the technology, but more importantly, what's going on in terms of your businesses and why you might need that. But first, if we kind of take a look back really of why we're here talking about this now, and this is a similar evolution that we've seen in all parts of infrastructure. But maybe it's taken just a little bit longer in terms of the networking. If we go right the way back, we effectively had kind of point-to-point solutions produced along copper, pretty slow, but allowed us to start bridging networks together. And often these were just offices on opposite sides of the road, but gave us those first networking. And really, the 80s saw an explosion into multi-point networking. The most significant portions of that were all of a sudden these became packet switched, which allowed us to make better use of those connections for bandwidth. But also, the introduction of frame relay, which is was a staple really of wide area networking, and X25, which pretty much was seen as the kind of early cloud in terms of topology. At the time, even kind of mid to late 90s, we were still around the 45 meg mark. So for big enterprise customers, this was a limit, and from a smaller customer perspective, these bandwidths were really expensive. And then we kind of move into the 90s was the bit really where this exploded, and the main reason for that was fiber optic became the standard in terms of those connections. We took out repeaters from the network and put in dense wave divisional multiplexers, and all of a sudden this allowed us to get more out of those single connections that we had from the provider level. And so literally every 6 months, their network capacity would double because they could effectively use more light frequencies down the same fiber. But some of the problems we had then, we still have today. So they're quite long deployment times, 3 to 6 months is typical. But really, like I said, that was the birth of MPLS and ATM, pretty much, which underpins our WAN connectivity now. So that kind of gives you an idea of the longevity of that. In the 2000s, we started to see the modernization of that infrastructure. So overlays over that network, better visibility, WAN optimization became a big thing. Let's not just keep putting more bandwidth. Let's find more ways to increase latency. Decrease latency. And then if we look at today, the 2010s was when SD-WAN was kind of available, really. And there's been an absolute explosion of vendors on the market that have an SD-WAN solution. Gartner lists 18, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And pretty much we have all flavors from going to buy a device off the shelf and doing it yourself, all the way through to using quite high-end, a full managed service by a provider. And the kind of word of warning here is similar in a lot of the other industries, really, which is the Metro Ethernet Forum are really the only people that have tried to publish some kind of standard in terms of SD-WAN, which basically means if you go out today and buy 2 different SD-WAN solutions, they'll connect in different ways. They're still using IP as the base, but the way they talk and interoperate is on a different level.
So yeah, I'll back John up on that one. That MEF70, it's important to remember, it's just a framework. It's not a technology standard. It defines how SD-WAN services should operate and the high-level features, but it doesn't define a set of protocols to allow devices to interoperate from different vendors. So at the moment, it very much is each vendor has their own solution.
And so I guess from so that's where we were, and I think one of the things it's important to look at is what problem does SD-WAN solve? Why all of a sudden are we talking about moving to something different? Most of you probably recognize this kind of diagram in terms of a business. We effectively connected everything into our own private little cloud. And attached it to a data center, which was often just at our HQ office. And then we had a single connection out into the public internet. It kind of made it quite easy to manage. We could put security in one place and allowed us to kind of manage what was corporate and what was public internet quite well. But it's a bit disingenuous to say it's as simple as that, because what happens is those sites normally are a reasonable distance to a point of presence. So we have to connect them in using fiber services into a point of presence somewhere. We ended up having to put in multiple connections if we want resilience. And of course, that also means if we're talking that I need 10 meg of data, then I'm going to put in two 10 meg connections to make sure that if I do fail over, that I can fail over with the right amount of bandwidth. A lot of providers typically don't allow you to run the service as an active service, so you're literally only using half of that. Now there are ways around that, but again, that's how that quite often happens. And then we had this proliferation of cloud services as a service. The one we're all quite used to now is things like Office 365 or Gmail, where all of a sudden we move those on-prem services out into the cloud, and that starts to change the way we think about those services. And in fact, a lot of us even moved our data center out into the cloud, and if it wasn't all of it, it was some of it. So we, in terms of things like application development in the early days, but also there are some fairly major services now that are being moved into the cloud because it makes sense to run it there. And what that means now is I have to backhaul all of my data through my private network to talk to something that in the main is further down the line in the public cloud. And so I still have to secure that, And the minute I start moving my security boundaries, I've got more stuff to manage. So again, in terms of how this model starts to change, I need more flexibility, I need more visibility, and this is where a lot of companies are today. And so it starts to make sense to move our connectivity. And that's not to say that we're going to connect everything to the internet or keep everything on-prem, but the flexibility to be able to then connect into that public cloud for latency, and then I also extend my security boundary back into the local location. Now I can do this already. If I have MPLS, I can use technologies like ExpressRoute to give me a connection out, but I want to manage the security on that, and that's where this becomes quite interesting on how I bring that back in. And in fact, this becomes even more complex in the fact that, I mean, COVID is a case in point. I'm currently working today and doing this webinar around about 100 miles away from my office. In fact, I'm about 40 miles away from my house, and I'm having to connect into the corporate network to pick up some services, but in the main, including this webinar, I'm connecting, directly into the internet. And so all of a sudden I have lots of remote users, remote sites, IoT is a case in point, small shops, maybe even unmanned places where maybe the services that they're consuming don't sit on the corporate network at all. And so what we need to think about doing is being able then to connect with the best connections that we can get them, but also manage that security layer out into the piece. So in short, the reason why SD-WAN, and I'm not embarrassed to show this slide that we had from a webinar 2 weeks ago, where we were talking about the journey into public cloud, and the fact that actually we shouldn't think of it as public cloud. We should just think of it as lots of clouds that we're connecting together. Some of them are private and in our data center, some of them are public, some of them may sit in DR or remote office locations. SD-WAN is a similar beast, and so the main three reasons that we talk about having SD-WAN is about the making it simpler and easier to deploy. So I love this idea as WAN as a service. Visibility, the ability to see where that traffic is, where it's going, who are our users. The ability for the software itself to adapt and say that it's better to send traffic on this link, or this link has an issue. This application needs a certain level of quality of service. That's a massive piece. And then finally, security. So SD-WAN gives us elements like microsegmentation, the ability to actually look at our users, our traffic types, our applications and services, and put a security overlay over that wherever you are, not just if you're in head office or you're working from home via a VPN connection, having to come through the same connections. In terms of approach, we effectively have two elements we talk about in terms of SD-WAN. The first is an overlay. So effectively, we're taking appliances, whether it be virtual, physical, or even now built into router OS, applying that so that we have an overlay to our network. So we're making things like quality of service and routing decisions and stuff like that over that overlay. The other one is a network-based and end-to-end solution. Effectively, we're doing that on the network layer itself. So we're doing that within the routers, within the actual fabric of the network. And typically there's a lot of pros and cons each way. We get a lot more in terms of the network-based SD-WAN, but what we don't necessarily get is the ease of deployment for the end user. In terms of consumption, just like any other service now, we have a lot of ways to do that. Right now, you can do it yourself. You can go, you can come to speak to us. We'll send you a couple of Silver Peak devices or Meraki or whatever else. You can put those on your network and start an SD-WAN solution yourself. It is as simple as that. However, in terms of managing that, these are by no means simple. Buy off the shelf, put in your network, and there you go. We still need to know a lot about topology, the applications, the security, and so the route that a lot of companies have taken is to stick with their network service provider. So a lot of us will be used to the likes of, in the UK, BT and Virgin, but there are actually a number of network service providers now who are arriving that SD-WAN is a core part of their offering. And right now, those companies will give you an SD-WAN solution coupled into their own. The hybrid above that is probably the managed network providers. So they're effectively, buying connections from tier 1 providers and then adding services on that to give you a fully managed service, probably give you a bit more flexibility in terms of what those services have. And then finally, a kind of a hybrid or combination of any two of those kind of three different types, where you may be doing some stuff yourself in terms of deploying that, but also having the ability to palm off, some of the higher level management to other companies. There's a word of warning that we seem to be having with SD-WAN more than any of the other software-defined technologies, and that's effectively, we can give you good and we can give you fast and we can give you cheap, but we can't have all three of those. The savings in terms of SD-WAN tend to come from the flexibility, the agility, the fact that I haven't got to lock myself into massive contracts. There is an opportunity to scale bandwidth in different ways than we probably have with traditional WAN solutions, but we shouldn't see this as this gives us the opportunity to go out and replace all of our MPLS connections with broadband connections, and we're going to save an absolute fortune. The SLAs and quality of service and everything else that's built into the underlays on those networks are kind of critical to some of the services we run. So absolutely, we may augment. So a lot of companies are keeping an MPLS connection and having an internet connection, and they use the two. But this isn't. We're going to save lots of money by going out and buying lots of cheap network connections to get to the same goal.
Yeah, I totally agree with John there. It's really important when looking at an SD-WAN solution that you don't think you can just rip out MPLS and replace it with SD-WAN. For key business critical sensitive data, you're still not going to get that reliability and guarantees that you get over an MPLS network when you're just trying to replace it with broadband connections. So it is one of the key things to consider when looking at an SD-WAN solution.
And then the final point, really, in terms of the deployment of this is again, absolutely, it's possible to go and buy an overlay solution and put it on on your network today, and effectively create an inline bridge that makes intelligent decisions. But again, in terms of best practice, you'd absolutely want to look at the design of your network to get the best out of the SD-WAN solution in terms of what those business goals. And so, what we tend to find in terms of the way customers consume this is they will quite often go and have some demonstrations, do a proof of concept. But actually, the approach normally is to migrate 2 or 3 sites and make sure we've ironed out all the issues. But it normally is a big bang. The majority of the network is changed across all in one. if we look at the market a little bit, it's fairly busy, but you can see from this is Gartner's Magic Quadrant, by the way. You can see from this that there's not a lot in the top right. There's a lot of niche players in the bottom left there, and actually that's no bad thing. The niche is about making sure that we're looking at those business needs and addressing those. It shouldn't be seen as these are these aren't the players for me. It's the fact that they address business needs, more than just the leaders that are generalist. And pretty much Bechtle, if you can see that on your screen, Bechtle has a pretty wide spread in terms of the SD-WAN providers we work with and sell. And so it's really important to us when we go through and look at that, what are the use cases and what are the business problems that we're trying to solve. In terms of predictions, and again, I'm kind of quoting Gartner here, really. And we talked about this before, but locations that will only have internet WAN, 10% today, 30% as this market matures. It's kind of telling us that generally we're not expecting to see internet only bandwidth being everyone's staple. For a lot of companies, it may be just that, but we're seeing that those other services are likely to stick around for some time longer. In terms of people that have implemented SD-WAN, we're around the we're a lot less than 20%. I think Gartner are being quite frivolous with their numbers when they're saying just below 20%. I think it's early teens in terms of that, and a lot of those deployments are either with managed service providers, where they're big corporates that have moved that way, or people that are deploying this themselves. Now that's not to say that all of these SD-WAN vendors are in business and they're selling lots of units, but I think if you look at the spread of that. But we're seeing a large increase of that, and right now COVID has kind of really helped with that discussion, not because people are looking to save money, but they have to be flexible, and a lot of their people are no longer working in those offices. The old the old design of network doesn't really match their current needs, and so if you look at the discussions we were having this time last year, we were probably looking at an 85 to 15% split in terms of standard WAN to SD-WAN. If you look at that, today, it's about a 60-40 split. So about 40% of customers are wanting to look seriously at SD-WAN in terms of that provision. And actually, at this point, I'll ask Beth, because it'll give us a good insight in terms of what we currently have on the call. Beth, can I ask you to put up the poll results?
Yeah, apologies on that. For some reason, the poll didn't show. I promise for everyone listening, we did try this a couple of times, but as always, when we're live, things don't work how we want them to work. So, yeah, okay. Unfortunately, it didn't work there, John.
Well, we won't show the poll results then. And another thing we talk about in terms of the market is, and I always get told off when I make statements like this, but I talk about it a bit in terms of the Wild West, really. It's an emerging market. It's right now, absolutely, you can go and buy things in the market that are solid, reliable. The service providers that are doing that have thousands of customers, and the solutions work well. But there's still a lot of trade in the market. So, just in the last few years, Cisco acquired Bechtle, and in fact, that product has been maturing in terms of what Cisco bring into that tool set as well. VeloCloud by VMware, Oracle Talari, and Aruba, literally in the last 14-15 days, announced their want to acquire Silver Peak. And I think that just goes to show that you know the big vendors realize that SD-WAN is definitely here to stay and is the direction we need to go in. But in terms of technology, it's still, you know, it's still being traded on the market until that position settles out. From personal experience, so I've actually a couple of years ago ran a 4-vendor POC for a replacement of an MPLS WAN. And you know, the conclusions we talked about were pretty much what we're talking about today, in terms of, you know, it would still require us probably to have an MPLS connection into those sites, but we'd augment that with other technology. We'd have to do a complete redesign of the network to take the biggest advantage of that. But those products absolutely worked, and you know, worked really well, particularly around those elements that we talked about in terms of the visibility, security, and everything else.
If I can just chip in there with a bit of my experience here, I find this Gartner Magic Quadrant really interesting. For starters, it shows how immature the market is. The fact that majority of people playing in this market are still considered niche players. There's a lot of companies there trying to do SD-WAN, trying to come up with their own unique little way of doing it, just to kind of stand out. It's also interesting that up in the top right corner, the leaders, you don't see the big players. And when I talk about the 2 big players in the networking field, I'm talking Cisco, I'm talking Aruba. Neither of them are in there at the moment. Both of them have done acquisitions to get into this market. Cisco have said that their acquisition of Bechtle was the fastest and most successful integration they've ever done. You can still buy Bechtel's own routers through Cisco, but they've fully integrated the Bechtle software into Cisco's own ISR routers. Aruba have been playing around now for a couple of years, trying to put an SD-WAN solution into their controllers. Not saying they've given up on that, that's something they're continuing to develop, but this very recent announcement of buying Silver Peak, I think is a fantastic move for them, because it does fill a big hole in the Aruba technology portfolio, which was their proper WAN proposition. So I think the next Gartner Magic Quadrant, the 2021, I think it will start to look a bit different. You'll start to see those big players really starting to shine in there like they do across the other networking market.
Cheers, Scott. And I guess from the other side, you know, we need to think about what you know, is SD-WAN right for you? I mean, the first thing is, you know, a lot of the things that were available in terms of SD-WAN are kind of currently available in standard WAN technologies. May not be at the same level, but you know, in effect, a lot of the things we're doing with SD-WAN is available in existing technology. It packages it and makes it usable, a lot more flexible, a lot more agile, and extends the ability for people to be able to do that without having to have, you know, 10 qualified Cisco engineers in-house. But you know, a lot of these things you are already doing in-house, and so that's worth thinking about. And it's still important to remember that we're, you know, when we look out into the future, we're still seeing that a lot of companies will be using standard-based IPsec VPN technology and MPLS off into the future. It's not like any of this stuff is likely to fall by the wayside very quickly. And I'd also want you to think about what you already have deployed. So right now, you will already have things on your network that have a software-defined, you know, WAN solution built into them. You know, right now, if you have Meraki in your standard licensing, you're able to extend that. You know, is it a fully featured SD-WAN solution that gives you everything? Absolutely not. Is it one that's simple enough for you to go and configure and make work? Yes. And again, in terms of the have access to it soon, you know, right now, if you're a Cisco HyperFlex customer, so deploying a virtualized infrastructure. You have the Cisco SD-WAN solution built in as part of the intersite deployment. So you're able to effectively deploy an SD-WAN solution that will connect your infrastructure together in multiple points without you seeing SD-WAN as a completely different kind of beast. And again, we're already seeing people connecting their current infrastructure out into Azure and AWS, having some of that granularity in terms of security and visibility and control, and doing it as an overlay within their current infrastructure without necessarily going out and buying a dedicated SD-WAN type device or solution.
I think for me, looking the experience I've had dealing with customers who are looking at SD-WAN over the last year, 18 months, the 3 vendors we've got on the right are kind of the key place I've seen it at the moment. A lot of people have used Meraki for years. In fact, have had SD-WAN, because if they've had MX devices, you only need the enterprise license to get the basic SD-WAN solution. There's continual developments there, though. Meraki now have a new license level on the MX device, which gives you more application aware features into their SD-WAN. So it's becoming a much more sophisticated SD-WAN now with Meraki. Fortinet aren't a big player in the networking world, really, especially for us, but their firewalls, they've always been very strong there. And the fact that they've integrated SD-WAN into there gives you a very good, secure solution. And if you are a Fortinet customer, you can integrate that well with their networking, their Wi-Fi, their switches. And of course, Aruba, we've already mentioned them with their acquisition of Silver Peak. Their SD branch solution's been great if you were already an Aruba customer, you already had controllers in the network. But now with the acquisition of Silver Peak, that's going to allow Aruba to go after a lot more different types of customers, I think. And I think it's one of the most exciting things that's happened in this field for a while.
Super, thanks, Scott. Look, in terms of wrapping up, I guess there's a few things for you to consider in terms of the outcome of this. The first one is your strategy. It's what does your network look like? What does your business requirements look like in terms of definitely where we've been in the last 6 months? Does that make you think differently about how your network fits together? For a lot of customers we're talking to at the moment, that's definitely definitely a driver here that people are no longer sitting in an office talking to a data center, and actually it hasn't affected the ability for them to do their work. So maybe the network connectivity does need to change, and that could be that we're putting more emphasis on our internet connectivity. It could be that we're looking at moving some of our services into the cloud. But does that fit your strategy? The next one, really a word of caution for those of you that have been through a massive network change before. These things take time. If we're going to put in MPLS or fiber-based connections, we could be looking at a 3 to 6 month lead time. If you've not used SD-WAN before, there's a whole bunch of demonstration and proof of concept work that you'll probably want to do. And so typically we want to move 12 months plus out from a contract change, a contract renewal date to have the conversation. That gives you plenty of time to review the technology, make sure that it does exactly what we need it to do, and have that all installed and running to shut down the other contract, rather than be in that default position where we've run out of time. And I guess really what important one for us is one size doesn't fit all. There isn't one answer, and I know some of the vendors will disagree with me if you read their marketing. Right now, in terms of customers that aren't doing this, they're not doing it because they feel there's not enough case studies, It's whether what they have works and it's reliable. They see the technology as immature still. The people that do tend to go with the big name brands that they're used to and want to do that. They, in terms of the visibility and reporting, that's definitely something that we're seeing customers want a lot more of. And finally, the best way to see any of this, actually see it in action. Let's show you how simple it is in terms of the managing your WAN day to day, and not necessarily having to rely on third-party tools to go off and find pieces of that data in different places. And so I'll kind of hand back over to Ajay as our host. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, John. Yeah, we do have a couple questions actually. The first one is actually more of a product question. So it's just Bechtle and Meraki, they're both Cisco solutions. Do you mind just shortly or briefly explaining the difference between the two? Probably more addressed to Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say, John, do you want me to take this? So typical with Cisco, Meraki's very much aimed at the smaller business companies that might not necessarily have a large IT department, or maybe an IT department at all. So they want simple to deploy, simple to manage. So that's kind of where Meraki sits. If you want that nice, simple to use, simple to deploy, easy network, Meraki, and then you've got various levels in there with Meraki's solution, especially now they've added the new license type. So just by MX devices, you can already set up simple connections and very easily establish your WAN over that network. And then you've got the added intelligence you can put on with the new SD-WAN license you can get, which gives it a bit of more application awareness. Cisco and Bechtle, again, is aimed at larger companies, maybe those who are possibly using multiple cloud, have multiple sites, the sort of customers who would be in the market for the kind of ISR routers, who possibly are using MPLS. So Bechtle gives you a lot more granularity on how you can manage it and what you can do over that network and the intelligence that's behind it as well. So really, it's more Cisco if you're a larger corporate, Meraki if you're a smaller business.
Thank you, Scott. And the next question was around, I guess, training. So do I have to reskill my team or myself to manage an SD-WAN environment?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
In terms of, well, I can tell you in terms of my POC experience, when we did that, my network engineer was quite happy in terms of the deployment of that. It did take a bit of training, but we kind of did that as part of the POC. But I guess the real answer to the question is it kind of depends. If depending on the level of functionality you want and the level of support you want, as I said, there's quite a few models of doing this, and so you do have the option to just push all of that onto a managed service provider who will manage your network exactly like they do today. So in essence, you could do that with pretty much no training whatsoever, other than maybe take advantage of the visibility tools and everything else you get. But actually the deployment of the other types of devices that you might be doing yourself, yes, there's some training, but actually most of this is delivered via IP, and so your training, sorry, all of it's delivered via IP. So you're doing a training based around quite a small subset. So there's not a massive relearning of technology that has to take place in any case.
Okay, thank you. And then the final question was around saving money. So you mentioned before SD-WAN might not be a cheaper solution than the traditional networking, but where is the saving in SD-WAN then?
So there is often a saving. in terms of monetary terms. I always tend to over-egg that and say let's not start talking about how we're going to save you all this cash. So there is quite often a saving, and like I said, in the engagements we've had, typically there's about a 20–30% saving, and that includes having to acquire new kit and technology. So there does tend to be a monetary saving there, but the real saving is in terms of the flexibility and agility and the quality of service that tends to give us. We have a self-healing network that's based upon so for instance, we'll have a self-healing network that's based upon the actual performance of that network. So rather than you be calling the service desk because all of a sudden telephony is breaking up or whatever else, your network will be automatically relaying those packets down a different link and making sure that works properly. And so quite often I try to keep away from total cost of ownership, because I know a lot of IT managers, as was I, are very skeptical about some of those numbers. But this allows a network to run without having to be so hands-on, and is able to reroute and self-heal as part of that overlay. And so that's really where a lot of the saving will come from.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So that's everything from a question standpoint. So I'll do a quick wrap up, John, if you don't mind just swapping to the next slide for me. So just to introduce the coming webinars for August, a nice follow-on to this one around SD-WAN. We're going to look at a little bit more into automation of your networking environment. So just trying to look at some of the manual processes that you're taking on a day-to-day basis and see if we can find an efficient solution to tackle that. And then we're going to be joined by Cisco for that one as well. And then the winning with AI is going to be myself and Christina from Microsoft, one of the AI wizards. We're going to talk about what really try and demystify some of the things, some of the topic and discussions around AI, and try and work out where are the use cases for the average business going forward, especially in this world of today. So if you have any further feedback, or if you'd like to see anything else shown, please let us know, and we will definitely take that into consideration. But we will leave it at that. And after this webinar, you will receive a survey that will come out, and just a little bit more around SD-WAN, and if you'd like to understand more, so please fill it in, and we will hopefully try and answer as many questions as we can. So thank you all, and thank you, John and Scott, for today for delivering the session.
Thank you.